Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Genevieve Gaunt, and it's my true delight to be here interviewing Orlando Whitfield about his sensational book, All That Glitters, a story of friendship, fraud and fine art. The book is a part memoir, part expose about Orlando's friend, Inigio Philbrick, who had a meteoric rise and spectacular fall. He was an art dealer, and in 2022, aged 36, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for defrauding investors out of around $86 million. Orlando is a self-described failed art dealer, but he is most definitely a successful writer. This book has been hailed on both sides of the pond, from the Telegraph to the Spectator to the Guardian, and in America by the New Yorker and the New York Times. And excitingly, it is being made into television by HBO and Bad Wolf, with the script being written by Patrick Radden Keefe, who you may know as a non-fiction writer of London Falling, Empire of Pain, Say Nothing. We will talk for 45 minutes and then open up to you for some audience questions. So, Orlando, for those who aren't familiar with the story, and in fact, can we have a raise of hands who has read this book? Okay, so we've got a mixed crowd here.
Thanks.
So, Orlando, can you remind us, or explain to those who haven't read it, what crimes did Inigio commit?
Well, the crimes he was convicted of were wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. I've never quite gotten to the bottom of what the aggravated identity theft was, but I suspect it was a letter he faked purporting to be from Christie's, the auction house. But that's a minor crime from which he actually was not convicted. But the wire fraud was, as you say, just shy of $87 million, in fact $86.7 million. Probably quite a bit more, but that's what the FBI were able to trace. Inigio operated at a level of the art market which is unbelievably kind of rarefied and high octane. Very few people at that level are really buying works of art to hang on their walls. These are works of art which go from Mayfair Gallery to Swiss Warehouse to auction house to, it's a pretty circular thing, as they attain value, or as value is, let's say, created. And so Inigio worked at that level for quite a while, and from a very young age was extremely successful. He and I met, in fact, at Goldsmiths when we were both studying there in 20 years ago this year. But he quite quickly started working for Jay Jopling at a gallery called Whitfield, which people may know, very linked to Damien Hirst and that the YBA artists movement, I guess. And Jay Jopling is one of the great dealers of his generation, and saw tremendous talent in Inigio. And he was, in the there's one review of my book which Genevieve mentions, which was in the New Yorker by a writer called Rosa Lister. It's amazing when someone reads your book and gets it so completely, and that was the one review. But she said something along the lines of, because Inigio had this artist mother and a curator father, and so he kind of grew up in that world to such an extent that Rosa, in her piece, wrote that he was almost, designed in a lab to do what he was going to do. I think certain aspects of his personality, and I'm not going to go into, I have no degree or knowledge really of psychology, but I suspect certain aspects of his rather unique personality were exacerbated by the extraordinary money he was quite quickly earning. So when we were living together in a flat share in Peckham, I was earning, I think, £16,500 for my first job in publishing, and he was earning £35,000 a year working for White Cube, and quite quickly went from earning £35,000 a year to £35,000 a month. and stopped taking the bus to work and started getting picked up in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes. So, I don't know, sorry if that answers any of your question, but yeah, Inigo, yeah. It was, as you say, although the meteoric rise thing, I don't know if, but I've always been fascinated by that, because of course meteors do not rise, which I have found a rather interesting, because that it's an expression used quite a lot about Inigo, but when I looked it up, the fact that we only see meteors, in fact, when they are coming crashing to Earth. And anyway, Inigo, obviously, like Icarus, did come crashing to Earth rather dramatically.
Can you explain about the frauds themselves and how he did something quite complicated with the share of a painting?
Yes, so of course, so as I say, these pictures, and they're almost always pictures, people are at that level, investment grade art, which is a hideous pairing or triplicate of words, is almost always paintings, and Inigo was buying and selling these works, but sometimes they are so much money, in the tens, if not the hundreds of millions of dollars. And dealers obviously don't necessarily have all that money to buy the picture themselves, or in fact, even if they did want to take on that kind of risk. So say Genevieve and I are offered a Mark Rothko painting by the lady in the front. I'm sure you probably have one. We'll talk afterwards. But we're offered one, and you want 100 million for it, which is a totally reasonable price for your Rothko. I'm sure it's a good one. But I haven't got 100 million. But maybe I've got 50, and maybe Genevieve has 50. So we buy the painting in half share. One of us or both keep control of the painting, but it lives in a Swiss warehouse. And we wait for someone to come along who wants to buy the painting for more than 100 million. So say the gentleman in the front row wants to pay 120 million for this picture. We would then sell the picture and split the upside, and off we go. But what Inigo did, which is less common now because the market has changed quite a bit, is to sell much smaller shares of very valuable pictures. So the gentleman to your left might buy a third, and a third, and a third, and suddenly we're in trouble because there are only 3/3. And Inigo got himself in real trouble because there's one particular painting which you may remember from the book, which was a painting by an Italian artist called Rudolf Stingel, which he bought and was absolutely convinced he bought with several partners, some of whom knew that there were other people involved in the purchase of the picture, others of whom were intentionally left in the dark. But Inigo eventually sold 220% of this picture, which is, as I have become used to saying, 120% more picture than exists. And so it's rather like, I don't know if any of you have seen the Mel Brooks film, The Producers, but it's not unlike that, except that, he obviously didn't, they wanted it to fail, he did not. And when that particular picture came up at auction in May 2019 at Christie's, he had to, I can't remember off the top of my head the exact numbers, but in order for him to make enough money to pay everybody out, I think it would have been 12 million. And unfortunately it sold for 5. And at that point everyone knew, because it's a public auction. And that was when the game started to fall apart, really.
So when that house of cards came crashing down, he fled. Where did he go? Is this 2020? So May of 19 was the Stingel auction. It took a little while. Inigo was extraordinarily good at delaying and remaining plausible while he was doing it. He's one of the more adept liars I've ever encountered. And so he kind of did keep people on the hook. Most auction houses will take or can take 90 days to pay. So when we sell our Rothko, we should expect a lengthy wait. So everybody was fairly kind of calm for a few months, and as I say, Inigo was good at calming friends.
frayed nerves. During a different, rather hideous deal that he and I were doing together, which I think is part of the extract I'm going to read later, Inigo told me, look, if your client is so agitated, that's your job, is to calm the client down. All of this money moving around the world, it takes time. Chill out. And he was very good at that. I was less good at that.
And he fled to...
I'm sorry, yes. So in October 2019, a lawsuit was filed against him. He had a gallery in Miami at the time and was living mostly in Miami, which is obviously always a red flag, I think. If someone moves to Miami, it's well, Donald Trump lives in Florida, you know how that's going. He found out a lawsuit was filed against him by some German business partners of his in a Miami court, and that was, I think, the first moment at which he started to think about fleeing. And later that month he did. He went first to Australia, where his then fiancée, now wife, had citizenship. I think they realised that probably was not the best place to stay. They have an extradition treaty with the US. And so I think, in fact I know, Inigo Googled countries without extradition to the US, and Vanuatu, which is from what I can see online, a lovely island nation in the middle of absolutely nowhere, quite near Fiji. And they went there.
In the South Pacific.
In the South Pacific, yes. It was. I was telling the nice man who drove me here from the station today. It's an island nation, so there are many islands. But on one of these islands is the tribe that worships Prince Philip. For some reason, when he arrived on whatever kind of weird roving diplomatic disaster of a trip he was on, the way in which he arrived and how he looked when he got off the boat fulfilled some prophecy of theirs. So anyway, that's beside the point.
Okay, so he moves to an island in the middle of nowhere where he thinks they can't get him.
Yes.
But they do get him, so how?
Well, he didn't have a false passport, so everyone knew where. I mean, the FBI would have known where he was at the click of a mouse. He was not protected from extradition because he was there on a tourist visa. He was in the process of applying for residence,
right.
But that didn't happen quite as quickly. And I suspect if the pandemic had not struck, he would have been arrested far earlier. But it took them until June of 2020 to jet in there on what I suspect will be Inigo's last ever private jet flight. And he was flown. He was grabbed from the street. I mean, there's no affection any longer between us, but I cannot imagine the horror of being grabbed off the street by burly men in polo shirts and then put on a jet with latex gloved FBI agents and flown to a military base in Guam. But that is what happened.
We'll get on to the aspects of your friendship and art, but I'd love you to read an extract from the book for us.
Of course. So I guess I should give a little bit of context here. This is a moment at which I left Inigo's gallery in around 2015, very conveniently just before his fraud scheme started. So, but around that time, I think this was 2017. He was really the only big player I knew in that game, and I had a client called Hugo, who still is a dealer, and he came to me and said, "Do you have a client for a big Christopher Wall painting?" And I said, "Yeah, no problem." And he said, "It's not Inigo, is it?" Because they had fallen out some years before, and he absolutely didn't want Inigo involved in the deal anywhere. And I said, "No." But this was. The extract here picks up after we've just had, let's say, some aperitifs at a quite expensive bar in Mayfair, all of which Inigo paid for with absolute ease. £400 worth of snacks and fizz are dealt with in under half an hour, although Inigo has been on the phone or texting, or on Instagram exchanging memes with a client or a would-be client more or less the whole time, so I haven't been able to find a moment to show him the wool. Inigo pays the bill and gives crisp £20 notes to everyone we've been in contact with since we arrived, and then we bundle ourselves back into our coats and, already warmed by the champagne and the bonhomie, step out into the velveteen frostiness of a London January evening. The cold bites at our faces, grinning with booze, but we haven't far to walk. Inigo seldom leaves Mayfair, unless that is he's leaving via an airport. We walk into Cipriani, the Italian restaurant he jokingly but not so jokingly calls the Canteen, because it's opposite his gallery and he eats there almost every day, where he is greeted like a son returned from war. Inigo hugs the maitre d' and hands his coat, a soft blue thing with an astrakhan collar that engulfs his neck like a headlock, to the Russian coat check girl, and she flutters her eyelashes so hard they seem to blur. I give over the jacket I have worn to cycle into town, still slightly damp from my efforts, and receive in return a pitying grimace. I agree, the reflective patches are not very Mayfair. The room is decked out like the interior of a ship, though less the cruisy kind that pensioners die on, and more the kind that Billy Zane wears white tie on. Polished teak and brass portholes that look onto nothing, and blue and white nautical linens, and sturdy, short-stemmed ship's wine glasses. This is not a room for the mere haves. This is a room for the have-yots. The food here is just like your Italian grandmother would make, he tells me as we sit down. If your Italian grandmother were a really bad cook and charged you a lot of money. I, for one, couldn't care less. There's a dessert trolley. Inigo takes the menu in hand and looks it over imperiously. 2 gin gimlets have arrived and already I feel my buzz. He orders for me, something he enjoys doing for everyone he dines with, or more accurately, buys dinner for. Inigo is always buying. I feel suddenly like a housewife from the 1950s, and the burnished edge of my boozy confidence is dulled ever so slightly. Is this the point? Is it a tactic on his part? Is this generosity as a form of power? I can feel the distinct lack of messages coming into my phone in my pocket as Inigo's continues to vibrate and glow next to his cocktail. I know only that on mine there was a collection of pixels that could make or break my career. Pasta dishes arrive one after another, and ruby discs of beef carpaccio and vitello donato, the colour of American tan tights, all jostle for position on our round table. Inigo texts with one hand and holds his fork in the other. I'm thankful, briefly, for Inigo's distraction as I try to soak up the alcohol sloshing around in my system, as I try to neutralise the insulin spike in my blood. Eventually I feel better. Inigo has put down his phone to talk to the maitre d', a lurching Italian man in a white dinner jacket who's come over to make a joke about something Inigo had texted him since we'd been in the restaurant. When he eventually saunters away, I seize the moment. You still in the wool market? I blurt, failing entirely to channel my inner Gordon Gecko. Always, he replies. I think I can detect a glimmer of surprise at my question, but Inigo puts a fork full of rigatoni into his mouth and waits for me to continue. It's your move, playboy. I take my phone out of my pocket and delete an alert telling me I have a text from my mother. Then I quickly put the phone on airplane mode, a trick Inigo taught me by proxy. You don't want your clients seeing a stray text pop up when they're looking at a picture on your phone. I find the image and drop the phone on the table with what I hope seems like nonchalance, as if selling Christopher Wool paintings is something I now do all the time at dinners in yacht-themed restaurants. The phone skitters over the starched tablecloth and knocks over a glass of water. Wryly amused, Inigo wipes the corners of his mouth with his napkin and then uses it to dabble water from the phone's screen. He looks at the image for no more than 5 seconds, zooming in on one corner with a quizzical expression. The wool, untitled D305 from 2006, exudes a frantic delicacy, the handiwork of a haphazard genius. The printed surface of the paper has the punky aesthetic of a zine comprised entirely of torn-up Rorschach tests. Anger and confusion are enmeshed in a sombre monotone web splotched with great greasy splats of pigment. This, of course, is if you view it in person. On my iPhone's damp screen, however, the wool looks far from impressive, but that is hardly important to Inigo at the moment. The collection of backlit pixels don't actually represent the wool as artwork. They represent its fungible monetary value. What we're looking at is a sales document, a trade to be executed, not an aesthetic experience. This is business, not art. Nice, he says. Are you direct? Directly in touch with the owner. Yes, I say. Client is in LA. Double lie. I'm only in touch with Hugo, who's either in West London or in the West Country. The painting is apparently in Switzerland, though I've no idea where the owner lives, or who she is, or even if the client is a she. But LA sounds impressive, and Inigo knows I've been there recently. What are you asking? He says. 6. Inigo basically only ever trades in US dollars, so there's no need to burden this snappy financial repartee, and the hundreds of thousands aren't even worth mentioning. What do you think this is? Retail? My net to Hugo was $450,000. There was still room to play. Inigo says. I could do 450. 500, I say. Okay, done, he tells me, passing back my phone and motioning to a loitering waiter. The whole thing is over in less than half a minute. My friend here would like to see the dessert trolley, please. And then, turning to me, they have the most insane ice cream too. It's like the stuff you had when you were a kid, but for about £10 a scoop. I guess the price somehow justifies eating kids' food. There's chocolate sauce. They bring you sprinkles. What a fucking world. The ice cream comes, great frothing heaps of it that look like torn-off clouds. And we pour over the hot chocolate sauce from a silver jug with its hand wrapped in a napkin tied in a bow. The ice cream collapses with a fatty sigh and we dig in. Oh, one thing, Inigo says, just as I shovel in a large mouthful. This deal doesn't involve Hugo, does it? Through my mouthful of ice cream, I lie.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you take us back to the beginning of your friendship and your first venture as art dealers together, and what was the first work of art that you sold?
Yes, so Inigo and I, as I say, we met at Goldsmiths, and it was an odd course because it was billed as being an art history course, but it was really, I think at the kind, it was an art theory course, and so there was a huge amount of reading, but only really, I think, 3 days of lectures a week, and we were pretty much expected to go out and see art, and Inigo and I spent a huge amount of time. At one point, I think we really did see, for a couple of years, every small gallery and institutional show that was on in London. But that wasn't really enough to keep either of us particularly occupied, and Inigo's internship, which had been going for quite a while at White Cube, stopped. And when we met up in New York, after the first summer the first summer after our first year at university, I had an internship at Christie's where I was kind of bamboozled by the whole thing. But I think Inigo was quite impressed that was what I was doing, aged, 20. And he clearly already thought quite seriously about becoming a dealer himself. And so in New York, he sort of said, well, should we do some art dealing? And I was like, well, fine, okay. I have no idea what that meant, but he was this very exciting new friend, and someone with whom I really had, I think I sort of felt like I'd found my tribe. I'd gone to a school before that, which was weirdly athletic, which was really not my bag at all. And then my best friends from school were either fishing enthusiasts or sports enthusiasts, and I really liked music and books and things. So I didn't really at that stage have anyone with whom I could talk about the things I was actually interested in. And Inigo was interested in these things, and in fact, we bonded over a particular series of novels by the writer Edward St Aubyn. But we started doing a few deals because he lived in this. His student accommodation was nothing like my student. My student accommodation was, you know, a room maybe the size of this panel here on the A2, with more lorry. If you know the lung cancer, I will almost certainly get. It will not be from the cigarettes. It will be from that year I spent inhaling lorry fumes all night. But Inigo lived in this extraordinary house on Great Russell Street, right next to the British Museum. It's sort of 5-storey Georgian house, which until the early 1980s was the grace and favour house of the keeper of coins and medals at the British Museum. But whoever the last keeper of coins, I can't quite remember the mechanics of how a woman called Sasha Craddock, who's an art curator, got the lease, but she got the lease of this house and as far as I know has hung on to it ever since. And it was too big for her and her daughter, and so over the years, more or less everybody in the English, in the London art world has spent some time living there. Damien Hirst lived there after his divorce. Nick Sirota, likewise. It was, and the Christmas party there is beyond, you know, anything that any gallery or institution could possibly hope to put on. But Inigo was living there, and so he was already unbelievably well connected. And one of the people who lived with him in the basement was a very large man who lived in a very small room, called Robert Macpherson, who was known to everybody as Poison, Uncle Poison, Macpherson, McPoison. He was, and I'm sure still has, a rather mordant tongue. But Robert had been a curator in the 1980s and had given Paula Rego, Portuguese artist, her first London show at a gallery called the Air Gallery in 1988, and he knew where most of these pictures had gone and had remained friends with the people who bought them, and he had one which was so big, I mean, a sheet of A4 with some watercolour, it was a watercolour, and he had been trying to sell it through Rego's gallery Marlborough, and I think they'd offered him £4,000 for it or something, and he was not amused by that offer. And he knew we had started this notional business called I&O Fine Art, which he instantly dubbed Idiot and Oaf Fine Art. But nevertheless, he gave us this picture to sell, and through the Spanish boyfriend of someone we knew at Goldsmiths, we managed to get in touch with a dealer in Portugal, where Paula Rego is a total rock star. She's, you know, the Hockney, R.I.P. of Portugal. He dedicated a museum to her just outside Lisbon, outside Porto. And so we kind of did a few emails back and forth with this guy, and suddenly a week later found ourselves on a 6 a.m. Ryanair flight with this picture, and I think managed to sell it for 15 grand in cash, which was problematic. We didn't know, as we quite quickly found out, that moving that amount of cash over the border is tricky without paperwork, but we had done it entirely without
paperwork. And
also,
on that note, how do you actually transport a painting without getting it around customs? How do you do that?
Oh, well, it wasn't very big, and we just put it in a... funnily enough, we've sold another Rego, which was quite a lot bigger than the first. The first one was this big, and we just put it in an unbendable envelope kind of thing, wrapped in some tissue paper, and it was fine. But a few months later, we sold another Rego painting from the same show, which was quite a lot bigger, sort of the size of this television screen. And my sister and I had been great jigsaw. I don't know what the term. We liked jigsaws as children, and when our parents divorced, the jigsaws would have to go from one house to another, and there were these cases that you could get for jigsaws where you do the jigsaw and then you velcro it flat so you can move it and do it somewhere else. And so we bought one of those, and I don't know if it still exists, but it turns out, or it was at the time, possible. There's an ability to, if you're getting married somewhere and you don't want to put your wedding dress in the hold of the flight, you can book a seat for your wedding dress. And so Inigo discovered this and booked a seat for this painting, and we moved this painting over to Portugal. And yeah.
If you had been discovered, caught either with a painting like that or with that amount of cash, would you have got in trouble?
The second painting was quite a lot more money, and that would have been. I'm not sure about jail time, but that would have been a criminal conviction. I'm sure of it, but we had absolutely no idea. I mean, maybe Inigo did. He didn't care, but I had no clue whatsoever.
Going back to speaking of jail time, can you talk about how this book came about, the cache of documents, speaking to him from his South Pacific retreat?
So yes, I kind of dropped out of the art world in 2018. I had essentially a breakdown and stopped working at the gallery that I'd set up with another friend. And in trying to figure out what I was going to do, I started working for an art restorer, conservator, who we may touch on later. But I was in the late part of 2019 and early 2020 when Inigo disappeared. I was doing a master's, and it was a conservation master's, obviously kind of hands-on kind of thing. And when that was cancelled in March 2020, and I was sort of sent home to do nothing to do, Inigo started just calling me kind of every day and just telling me about his life in Vanuatu, which sounded fine. And at a certain point, he said he knew I'd always had an ambition to write, and I had already been working at that point on a book about the art world more generally and my experiences therein. And he said, well, look, he also, of course, knew I had connections in that world. My mother had worked in publishing, and he knew I knew literary agents, and I had indeed worked in publishing for a few years. And so he rang me and said, how would you feel if we collaborated on a magazine piece? I said, well, that sounds interesting. How would that work? And he said, well, look, I've got all these documents and I can send them to you, and then we can have these calls. Well, I said, fine, that sounded really interesting, and I had absolutely nothing else to do. And because of the time differences, it would be most mornings of the week, and during the pandemic I would wake up and I'd be sitting in bed having coffee, and Inigo would call me on FaceTime or whatever it would be from his desert island hideaway, and would just tell me story after story after story, and all of them were backed up by these reams of documents he sent me, which of course I now realise were in fact evidence.
It's extraordinary that you would send someone all of that evidence. Why does he do that? And when you were having these conversations, in good faith, did you record them on voice notes so that you could maybe write this magazine article? Because those anecdotes must have gone into the book. Or is your...
I mean, I kept I kept a lot of notes, and yeah, I had these documents,
and a good memory, I assume, because there are certain details the way that the book's very evocative, even just being in Mayfair, the sights and the sounds and the smells and describing people as...
Yeah, I mean, I've kept a diary for years, and I guess, yeah, I have, a goodish memory, and, they were not... Most of the things that happened in this book were not run-of-the-mill things. They were memorable events, almost all of them. And I mean, I think so. Inigo pitched it to me as, well, you tell my side of the story, because there had already been at this stage quite a lot of press, a long piece in the New York Times, a piece by a guy called Kenny Schachter. Glad to hear a titter from the front row. That man is a delight. He's threatened to sue me several times. Very little understanding of how the law works. Kenny had written this piece, which was originally in New York Magazine and then was run in the Saturday Times magazine. And so I think Inigo wanted to get the word out, but he also knew, I suspect, that if he were to ring, let's say, Patrick Radden Keefe, Patrick was going to do much more digging than I think he thought I would do.
He was wrong.
He was, I'm afraid, wrong, because I quickly realised that actually what Inigo wanted me to do... I mean, the stories he told me were mostly backed up by the documents, but the documents also told their own story. And this was very clearly not, as Inigo told me, a case of a young man who got in over his head. This was a years-long fraud scheme in which he knew exactly what he was doing. There was no moment. There were so many moments in which he could have held his hands up and said to people, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do here, declare bankruptcy, do whatever it would be. Didn't do anything. He just dug deeper and lied more. And he, telling me he wanted me to tell his side of the story, that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted me to tell his version of events. And that was something I couldn't do.
He only went to jail for 3.5, 4 years of his 7-year sentence. Yeah. Wow.
I've never quite understood that.
It's like a magician.
Yeah. Houdini. I think he got out, as I understand it, he got out, well, he certainly got out with an ankle, an electronic tag on his ankle, which he loved showing off in Vanity Fair. Literally a sort of photograph of him with his, tasseled loafer. He got out, he made quite a big thing of being a heavy drinker and a drug user, which both of those things he was, but I certainly never saw those things impede his judgment. But he leant on that quite heavily in his. He didn't defend himself because he pled guilty. But when he was sentenced, that was given as kind of mitigating circumstances. And so he got out of prison and did, I think, a drug rehabilitation program. But he is still under. He's still. I think has to report to parole. People still has a tag. His sentence does last until next year. He's just no longer inside.
You raised something just there, which I was wondering, reading the book. He was very successful in a legal sense. He didn't necessarily have to go down the illegal route. And I think the judge asked the same question that we might ask, which is, why did you do it? Did he have an answer, or did he?
Yes, I was on holiday at the time, frantically checking my phone for the court documents to come online, and I remember reading it, and I thought, God, he's just provided the line. He's written the line for me. It felt suddenly like a collaboration. He just stood in front of the judge and said, I did it for the money. And the judge said, that simple? And he said, that simple. It was.
Is it that simple?
How long have we got?
We've got 2 minutes then.
Okay. The short answer is yes, it's that simple. He had a relationship with business, and I think quite a kind of ended up being quite a familial relationship with Jay Toppling, his original backer. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, Inigo decided that Jay wanted too much, was too greedy, and was taking. He was it is absolutely true to say that Inigo was making a vast amount of money for Jay, and of course for him. But Jay was taking quite a large cut of it, which was absolutely his right, given the contract that they'd entered into. But Inigo wanted out of that, and in order to get the funding he needed to carry on doing deals, he got into bed with some quite scary people. I think at one point he took out art-backed loans over a period of years, and I think at one point he told me that his monthly interest payment on just one of the many loans was $150,000 a month. Just the interest. How he was able to function on a daily basis, I continue to be amazed by, but I think he's wired slightly differently.
If you defraud someone out of $80, maybe $87 million worth of money, what happens? What's happened to that money? And is he still in debt? How does it work? And is it quite dangerous from his perspective to now be out and about in the world? Is it dangerous from your perspective in terms of? Is it? Yeah.
Well, on the last one, I hope not. I've got a very scary-looking puppy at home, so I'm hoping that she will ward off any terrifying visitors. But thus far, there haven't been any.
Did people press you not to write this book?
No, people warned me that there might be some blowback, and certainly there were people who were displeased by the book, but thus far no one has tried to sue me. I think actually the statute of limitations has currently run out, but what I didn't realise until my publisher recently told me that so if the TV show gets made, they will do a TV tie-in, a new edition of the book with presumably some cover art from the TV show on it. And at that point, the clock will start again for a year. so yeah. In terms of Inigo and danger, I don't know really. I mean, some of the people he was in bed with were not entirely savoury. I don't know what his life consists of at the moment. I mean, my agent occasionally sends me screenshots of his Instagram, and it looks like he's having a very nice time. And so I have no idea where the money went, but someone's buying those yacht trips and dinner jackets. And
this is potentially a stupid question, but are you friends at all?
we haven't been in contact since before he pled guilty.
Right.
No, I told him I was writing the book, and I mean I had told him before, but when I told him that I'd got a book deal, he was quite unhappy about it, and I remain unclear why he was unhappy about it, because, well, I don't know how you feel about this or how other people who have read the book feel, but I think I gave him quite a fair hearing. I think that certainly I know that when my book went out to publishers in early 2021, there were at least 2 other book proposals out on submission, both of which were by art journalists who had never met Inigo, that were never going to give him any kind of grace at all. That it was going to be criminal Inigo from page 1 to the end of the book. And I hope at least that I have drawn a portrait of someone who was corrupted not just by, the devils of his worst nature, but the moral ambient temperature of a market and a world which is just shy of boiling point.
You quoted Larry Gagosian. Can you remind me of
what's the line? Larry...
He was asked...
Larry is by some distance the most powerful contemporary art dealer in the world, probably that has ever been, apart from Devine, but of course Devine, some of the old masters. Larry was asked in a Village Voice interview in 1988 what he would change if he could, what he would change about the art market, and he replied, that's like asking Dante what he would change about the structure of hell.
Kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I hope so, anyway.
I have a few more questions that we can ask, but I'd like to open it out to you.
Oh, straight away, yeah.
Does the subject, Inigo, did he appreciate art? Was he a lover of art?
He absolutely was. Yeah, that's the sort of tragic thing about it. He was more knowledgeable and more passionate about art when we first met than anyone I'd ever met.
So how did that go to being able to be part of this? And it's a personal response I've just had when you described this, putting things in a Swiss bank and never seeing them again.
Well, it's very nice. It's a very nice thing to earn that kind of money, and he was very, very good at it.
But so much more money than anybody needs.
Of course, but tell that to Elon Musk, who just became a trillionaire. I mean, I don't think he could have stopped at billions, but this is. My father, who was in the art world for a long time, once knew a man called Christopher Lennox Boyd, who was a Guinness. He was a very, 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 very wealthy man. And he had one of the largest collections of mezzo tints in the world, a particular kind of print. And my father used to take my sister and me to Church Street Market in West London, just off the Edgware Road. And once or twice we would bump into Christopher, who was a pretty distinctive man. He was about 6'7" and maybe 400 pounds. He was a giant of a man. He was, incidentally, the only person whom Huntsman, the tailor, had ever had to charge extra for cloth, because they just couldn't make the margins unless they charged it. anyway, that's beside the point. We bumped into Christopher, who would be burrowing through these boxes and boxes of prints. Bearing in mind, this is a man who drives a Rolls Royce all over town and lives on a house on Upper Brook Street. And my father said to him, "Christopher, what do you do?" And he looked up very briefly from going through these prints. And he said, "These are all marked at £10 and some of them are worth at least 15." I think at a certain point, brains... There have been studies that show that large amounts of money, that earning a lot of money, being extremely wealthy, can deaden empathy in people's brains. And I think that Inigo grew up around, in a milieu where he was friends with people who were stupendously wealthy. He told me this story once about a gap year thing that he went on to Thailand. And two of the other people who were on this thing, one of them was Michael Eisner's daughter, so the former CEO of Disney's daughter, and one of them was one of the Coppola families. And he said that before that he'd understood that people were richer than his family. You know, he had a friend whose dad owned all the Lexus dealerships in Connecticut, and he had a friend who was a very successful periodontist. They were very wealthy people, they're members of country clubs, etc. But then he met these people like the Eisners and the Coppolas, and he realised that there's just this whole other level. And he comes to London and he starts to meet people. I'm not going to name names, but like, if you read my book, you will realise that of, let's say, 80 to 90% of Inigo's victims, that's inherited money. And he realised quite quickly that he was cleverer than them, and that it was there for the taking. And as I say, the moral temperature of that world is such that, you know, he came to a gallery dinner that I gave when I opened my gallery with a friend, and he sat next to someone that's kind of this old dealer and art collector that I'd known a long time, a posh old English boy. And I sat them next to each other because I thought that'd be kind of a fun meeting of minds. He came up to me afterwards, he said, "Who is that American? Total fucking shark." And years later, you know, I couldn't see this. He was, at the time, one of my closest friends. My editor at my London publisher said to me, I just, every time I look at photographs of him, all I see are the sort of cold, dead eyes of the shark. He became a predator, and he was fucking good at it.
Can I just say, firstly, thoroughly enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
I wasn't able to put it down for some days. I read it virtually in a week.
Thank you.
One of the things that's interested me is how there was a finance man, wasn't there, in the background that I think got 22 months.
Yes, Rob Sheffield. Yeah.
Why is nothing ever said? You never hear him mentioned other than that he served time. Would you say that he was the person who was involved more in guiding and showing Inigo what could be done with the money, or in terms of the selling and apportioning of paintings?
I'm going to be very careful legally
I know.
speaking.
I was just about to say, don't feel you have to.
Yeah.
You know, I just wondered, you know, where he sits in all of it, because also in the programmes, Inigo was very, very careful and didn't want to speak about Chapter, and just went very quiet. And I just wondered, were these people really key to what he did, or was it all about him, do you think?
So I think when I the first time I did any event like this, sat on stage and talked to someone about my book, was in October of 2023, about 6 months before the book came out, or 4 months. And someone came up to me afterwards, a woman I'd never met who worked at another publisher, and she said, "I know Rob Sheffield. They're our next door neighbours, or they live on the same street." And Rob used to cut, Rob and his wife, who's I believe probably still is an NHS doctor, they would come over for dinner quite often, and when Inigo would call, even if it was like 11 at night, he would run out of the room like a little girl. It's some whose crush was calling. Inigo was, and I remember that feeling so vividly at that moment. He had extraordinary power over people, a real charisma, a real, again, you know, trying to be careful with the words I use here, not legally, but just sort of psychologically, but he was extraordinarily charming and plausible, and he made you feel in the time that you were with him, if he wanted to, obviously not at this point when he's spending, you know, with the abstract array, when he's just like on the phone, but when he wanted to, there's actually a lovely line in Brideshead about Sebastian and Charles, and I think it's Sebastian's sister, whose name I've now forgotten, you probably will remember, but the one with whom Charles falls in love. Anyway, she says, the thing with Sebastian is when the light shines on him, it's like your own personal sun. But when it doesn't, it's darkness, purely. I don't know, I think, of course, you know, I mean, it could be as simple as the fact that, like, Rob didn't have the flashy girlfriends or the flashy name or the, you know, he was a kind of backroom Svengali. Okay. But, you know, I don't think Inigo is entirely lying when he says that he learned an enormous amount of the kind of financial whiz-kiddery from Rob. Whether Rob was teaching him this stuff to kind of encourage him to go and do the things he did, that I can't say. But certainly, you know, Rob worked for McKinsey for a long time, and you know, he knew his way around dodgy accounting. And,
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope dodgy's not going to get a libel soon.
No.
There we go.
Any other questions? Yes. We've got two questions. Lovely. Man behind.
I'm a big believer in exploring different aspects of life and opening your mind to things. But I was a secondary school head teacher for a long time in quite deprived areas. If a young person come along to me and said, you know, I'd love to be an art dealer, I wouldn't have a clue about what went on, any advice whatsoever. What would you say to them?
Don't. Well, tell them to read my books.
Those numbers you're talking about are so hypnotic, aren't they?
Yeah, of course they are, and of course it is. It is somewhat like magic that two people could sit and look at an image on a phone in an expensive restaurant and both do a deal like that. Sorry?
It's unbelievable.
It is completely unbelievable. Yeah. But you know, at the very high levels of kind of all, you know, I mean, at that level, it's no longer the art market. This is just a financial market where art is the asset. You know, there are dealers at, you know, I don't know, anywhere from, you know, £60 level to, you know, a few £1,000s painting.
You do take my point, though, the idea of making that leap from ordinary life into the world that you were operating in. It's beyond the understanding of most people.
Absolutely, yeah. And I sort of, I mean, I absolutely tripped over something and fell into it myself. I mean, yeah.
Although both you and Inigo did have parents who were...
Yeah, I mean, my father worked at Christie's, but you know, he was on a salary, not on a commission. My father was, unfortunately, well, zero help to me at any point. You know, my father was basically, he dealt, his expertise were Renaissance bronzes and French furniture, neither of which are anything, you know, that I'm sure there are people out there making lots of money selling French furniture, but I don't know them. He didn't have an expertise, and he wasn't willing to introduce me to anyone. I think my father thought Inigo would end up in prison. He always said that, and you know, he died a year before he did. But you know, my dad knew a crook when he saw one. Sorry, I don't really know if I've answered your question. I have no idea how. I would certainly recommend that people do not try to get into that world.
I don't think there is any answer to somebody like that.
Yeah.
You can't possibly forward, can you?
No, I mean, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, my book paints a portrait of a really very small part of the art world. And there, of course, it's not just one art world. There are many art worlds. And there are art worlds in which the vast majority of those worlds are worlds in which people go into starting a gallery, working with artists, because they love art and artists. That's why I left working for Inigo and started a gallery showing, you know, first gallery show we sold, if we'd sold everything, I think our profit would have been in the sort of £10,000, £15,000 mark. You know, and that would have been 6 to 7 weeks' work and a lot more of the rent. You know, I've got a lot of friends, you know, the business builds very, very slowly, and my former business partner is going great guns and is now selling very expensive artworks. But he now, because of his unfortunate tacit association with Inigo via me, he is now completely honest with all of his clients. So instead of saying like, right, okay, $100 million Rothko, not that he does, but you know, let's say like it's a 10 grand painting. Like he's going to say, look, I'm going to ask 12. I paid it. Like he's completely transparent, and I think there's a new generation of dealers who
don't want to go to prison.
Not just don't want to go to prison, but I think they don't want the association. You know, I dated someone for a while whose family told her to stop dating me because art dealers are dodgy people. I think there is a real, like, you know, it's a little bit like, it's a little, you know, what's that fast show thing? A little bit woo, a little bit wee. Like, it's not, yeah.
It's not wholesome.
It's not, yeah, you're not an oncology doctor, really. It's not, people look at you differently sometimes, and, you know, and the money is, it's a disgusting level of wealth. It shouldn't, I mean, you know, I think I hope we can all agree that billionaires shouldn't exist. But they do, and they like buying art because they can move it around and avoid tax by doing that. You know, nothing's going to change because who's going to change it? But that's that. I hope at least that my book shows that the art world is reflective of something wider, which I think we're all aware of pretty acutely by now. That our world is run by billionaires who like the Lord of the Rings. It's horrendous.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, I think that's like it came in with the financial crash, didn't it? A lot of foreign agents came on to give you.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly my hypothesis, is that, you know, an enormous amount of money flooded into the art world in the late 2010s, because this was money which was just otherwise going to kind of, you know, die a death in the financial markets, and because also it is a completely unregulated market. And you know, I write about this guy I knew years ago, who I met at a wedding, who was a trader at Goldman Sachs, who told me precisely that he had got into collecting or into trading art because he could do things. He could indulge his most base in financial instincts. You know, there is no such thing as insider trading. There is no such thing. You know, all of these things which you would be struck off from in the city. I mean, it is no surprise that, I can't remember which was Tamara Eccleston's husband has been struck off from the city. He will never get financial trading, like an FSA license again. Guess what he's doing now? He's selling shares, like 0.1% of a Warhol over Instagram.
Can I just start in the programme? In a sort of delusional way, I see his charisma. Was he thinking that was a launch pad to make some sort of comeback?
I think it was certainly hope, but you know, we're here a year later.
What's your best guess as to what he'll reinvent himself as?
Reality TV.
Good guess.
I mean, because of course his wife, made in Chelsea. I honestly don't know. I mean, I've spoken to many dealers and gallerists. The weird thing about writing this book, I always assumed that I would be a complete outcast in the art world after that, but actually I get calls from dealers like 2 or 3 times a month with like, oh, do you want to know this bit of gossip? And they just like, I think they realised that the book, it shattered something, but also it didn't, like, it didn't break. They're all still doing whatever they wanted to do. The market's changed. It's got a lot softer. They're having to work a lot harder for every deal. But the gossip's still great fun.
Fantastic. We have one quick question.
Sorry to me
Of course,
again.
yeah.
I just have one more question.
Of course.
There was a suggestion, I think, that some of these paintings that Inigo was involved in trading had disappeared. Are they in a vault somewhere?
They'll be in the Swiss warehouse.
Who knows who owns them?
Well, there are, as far as I know, still. I think one of these cases was resolved fairly recently.
Right.
But there are, there's still people who are kind of quarrelling about who owns what. Yeah.
Right.
And where those paintings are, I can't tell you, but Freeport in Geneva.
Okay.
Something like that.
And is he still having to give 5% of everything he
15,
owns?
I think.
It's 15?
Yeah.
Right.
But
Okay.
I've no idea what he's earning. So
No.
if you're not earning 15% of nothing, is still nothing. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that to the victims of his fraud?
Yeah. I mean, I have no idea what's going on with civil suits and all that kind of thing, but I would have thought,
Messy.
Deeply, yeah. I mean, I know that he has or had a civil suit filed against him by Fine Art Partners, the German kind of. They backed deals of his. And then there was another one. What were they called? Not Artemis. Some art. I've forgotten what they're called now. Anyway, the people to whom he was paying allegedly 150 grand a month, which are an art investment, art-backed loans company owned by the Carlyle Group.
Right. So he's out, but he's not out.
I mean, he'll never be out from under this. Would anyone here want to do a deal with Inigio Philbrick? I mean, also the art market has changed. I mean, it really has changed dramatically. I speak to friends of mine, and they a friend of mine did absolutely no business between September at the end of he's in a prime bit of real estate next to an auction house. He did no business between September last year and April. And it was almost about to close, then he did an art fair and sold like $7 million worth of art. But, it's really feast or famine, whereas the market that Inigio worked in was extremely kind of hyped. You could buy a picture from a gallery in East London for 30 grand and take it straight to an auction house and sell it for 300. It was mad, and that's gone. That kind of speculative market is completely gone now. It'll come back 100%, but not right now.
Thank you, Orlando. What we've discussed today is, if you haven't read the book, just the tip of the iceberg. I highly recommend it. It's brilliant, it's engaging, it's entertaining. He writes like an angel. So if you want to buy a book, I'm sure Orlando will be signing. Thank you, Orlando, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.